Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Smith. I'm with the U.S. House of Representatives. I work in the Committee on House Administration, and I'm here today to talk to you a bit about best practices in kind of parliamentary modernization and how we here in the House had applied AI in terms of our strategy and our implementation as we went about incorporating that technology into the institution. So with that, let me give you a couple of minutes just to paint a really high-level picture of the committee's areas of jurisdiction and why we were going about this, and then I'll dive into some of our practices and how we went about the actual work. In the U.S., the House of Representatives has a very unique committee that focuses on the administration of the House itself. And so that covers all of the key officers within the House, our chief administrative officer, our clerk of the House, our legal officers and parliamentarians. And then we also have a role in an oversight role in our ledge branch agencies. So those are our Library of Congress, which includes our Congressional Research Service, our Government Publishing Office, which publishes all of our government documents, and as well as our Capitol Police Force. So those are just a few. There are a lot of other smaller agencies and offices, but those are just a few of the ones that we decided to focus on for this particular endeavor. So with that wide scope of oversight, the picture was kind of in the middle of 2023. We saw out in the world that, AI, in particular, ChatGPT, had just emerged onto the scene as a new general technology that, was garnering massive attention, both in the private sector and in government. And as of the summer of 2023, the vast majority of the attention in the world of government was focused on the executive branch and how they were going to use this technology. Almost nobody at that time was focused on the legislative branch of government. And so within the committee, we were looking at this and thinking, how do we look at this technology, evaluate whether or not it'll be usable by us, realize the value of it in terms of an oversight tool, and help us perform our jobs as effectively as possible in terms of, kind of harnessing this technology to use to synthesize large documents, to understand complex laws, to just aid our very overworked staff in their day-to-day responsibilities. So that is the kind of context with which we started our work. And with that kind of general picture being painted, I'm going to dive into 5 best practices because that's kind of the scope of this discussion, but I'm going to caveat this. I at this point, I wouldn't call these really best practices. I'll say that they were leading practices or maybe just practices, but this was how we approached our oversight work in bringing the technology into the House. And kind of the proof will be in the pudding, if you will, in terms of whether or not the way that we went about this really was the most effective or not. I think right now we're starting to see really like the fruits of our effort come to start to pay us dividends. So I think that it overall has been successful, but you all will be the judge in terms of whether or not these really were the best practices. Okay, so I think going about the work, the first thing to write down, right? The first practice was establish a solid oversight plan. First and foremost. So the way that we went about this ourselves was we looked at the laws that existed at the time related to AI, and in the U.S. there at that time, says June 2023, July 23, there were 2 laws that had been passed that governed AI in government operations. So we took those, and then we did an analysis of at the time there were 3 executive orders that also had been issued. So we looked at that as our body of law, and we analyzed the elements of both of those laws to kind of develop a baseline assessment of, what we should be paying attention to. And that initial baseline assessment had a couple of different parts. Number one, were there executive level policies that were put in place in the agency? Were there managerial level working groups that were starting to take shape? Was there attention being paid to staff upskilling, meaning we're rank and file staff learning how to use AI technologies? Were there results? Were there any pilots that were being put into practice, whether they're small or large scale? And was there any transparent reporting that the agency was doing to tell the public how they were starting to think about or use AI systems or tools? So that became, those kind of elements, which are like the x-ray of the two laws that we had, became our initial baseline, our leg that we were standing on when we started to think about how to establish an oversight plan. And so we took that like x-ray and we said, okay, well, this is great. We know what the law is telling us. Now we have to figure out how to apply it to the agencies in our jurisdiction. We've got a ton. We have a lot of agencies. It was a little bit too much for us to scope at first to just say we're going to apply this to everyone. So we just took a handful. We took 4 agencies. The 4 agencies that we took were the most closely tied to like the legislative workflow. And we said, all right, we're going to take this x-ray of the laws. We're going to apply it to these 4 agencies. And that became basically our oversight plan, that kind of matrix. And with that like simple matrix, we spent a lot of time in the beginning going around to every member that we could identify who had an expressed interest in artificial technology or in AI technology. And so that was both Republican and Democratic members of our like member-led caucuses. There were members who had either written op-eds or submitted sponsored legislation on the topic. They were members who had tried to use it, for example, like in writing op-eds or writing floor speeches or even drafting legislation. So it was a wide net of any member that we could think of that was using the technology. And we reached out to we call them LDs, they're legislative directors, so their staff. And we walked through the outline of our plan with every single one of them. We asked for feedback, incorporated their feedback, and really used that to get to the point where we felt like we had a solid oversight plan. And then formulated that, got member sign off on that, and then ultimately turned that plan into a letter to those 4 agencies requesting monthly updates on those elements that I mentioned. And so all of that effort, that first kind of practice of established solid oversight plan occurred in 2 months. There was a little bit of June, but mainly July and August of 2023. Which brings me to my second practice, which was using agile oversight to spot problems in real time. Okay, so now we've got our plan, we sent our letters out, the ball is in the agency's court. They are working to get us responses on a monthly basis. We very intentionally asked for monthly reporting because we knew it would be hard. We did not want a one and done. We wanted a regular and sustained management attention in these agencies looking at kind of how to deeply assess, implement, and put into place AI systems, right? And so every single month, they're reporting to us on how it's going, whether or not they have policies in draft, whether or not they've done any trainings for their staff, whether or not they have any pilots that they're ramping up. And what those monthly, like that monthly cadence really allowed us to spot weak spots and problems real time. And so it made it like exceptionally easy to just read through these responses and say, okay, let's just take like our clerk's office, right? They were not pushing forward on a policy, right? An executive level policy for AI because they needed another office to lead with that policy. They didn't feel like it was their place. It allowed us, as the oversight entity of both of those offices, to jump in and kind of unwrinkle that holdup and put more focus on, you know, the office that was going to issue that policy and really work with them to try to speed that along, now knowing that there was another person waiting for them. And so without that monthly cadence, we would have missed opportunities. We would have let too much time go by, especially given how quickly this, the world was adapting to AI. Another example, we were seeing about half of those 4 agencies that we reached out to, 2 of them were not publicly reporting on use cases in the way that we wanted. And so we were able to, look at their websites, read what they were telling us, and then go back to them kind of behind the scenes and say, hey, wait a second, we're asking for public reporting. We're looking at your website. You are not publicly reporting everything that you're telling us. Why aren't you doing that? And so to really like drive those conversations internally. And that wound up, each of those levels, whether it was executive level or staff level or the kind of public reporting level, we were watching those every month, and kind of jumping in. And so that public reporting, that agile kind of cadence of letters and responses happened for about, I'd say, 6 months. And we, by the way, at the committee level, we're also holding ourselves to that standard in terms of us also reporting to the public at that monthly cadence, to make sure that we were highlighting successes and kind of keeping our external stakeholders involved. So by the culmination of that 6 months, we were able to really step back and get to what I would consider like the 3rd best practice that you should write down, which is just allowing for a wide variety of flexibility in reaching the goal of AI implementation. So by this point, we had widened our cohort. We were up to more than 4 agencies. This is fast forward a few months, and so when you looked across the board, we were dealing with many different IT departments across many different agencies. A few hundred people at a minimum who were involved in the actual implementation of different systems. And we were able to see different similarities and differences amongst and between them. So I'll highlight first some of the differences that we saw, which were, radically different cultures across our agencies. If you compare the Library of Congress, let's say, with 3,000 employees and a mission of like widespread dispersal of knowledge, with a Capitol Police Force, right, which has many fewer employees and is tasked with keeping the Congress safe, we're dealing with completely different missions, completely different cultures, and those are just 2 examples. But it kind of gets to a point of explaining some of the different risk tolerances that we saw across our agencies, right? So we've got, and also across our projects, right? So some projects, you're dealing with very safe and easy data to manipulate and use, data that's already been published, data that's in the public domain, data that is there for research purposes. So a lot of those use cases center around our library or our Congressional Research Service. It's stuff that's already out there, or legislative information. Completely different, appetite for risk when you're dealing with, let's say, AI systems that we're thinking about bringing in to either our member offices or our committees that are going to touch any sort of sensitive data. And so we were taking a lot of care throughout this period to allow for different approaches to risk. And, depending on what the agency was that we were working with or hearing from and what the project was. We also have a very fragmented enterprise architecture approaches and tools and system makeup across our agencies. And so really like being mindful of the complexities with which our CIOs are operating under and the unique needs and environments that they've built really kind of forced us to give as much flexibility as we could to our different agencies. So those were just some of the differences that we saw, right? We also were able to bundle up and see a whole ton of similarities, right? Most of our similarities centered around acquisitions complexity, and looking for ways to fast track emerging tech. We saw a lot of similarities around the challenges with staff upskilling and just the amount of time that it takes to deploy trainings for a lot of different people and different ways to like prioritize staff across agencies. We saw a lot of our agencies prioritize IT staff and cyber staff for the first tranches of AI training, and then slowly work their way in closer and closer to the hearts of the missions for those agencies. And then we saw some similarities with like ways to think about, making innovative tech units within the larger IT shop. And, so we saw a couple of emerging innovation labs across our legislative branch. At this moment, we have 3. At the start of all of this, we had 2. So it was very exciting when that one other one was announced and started to grow. Okay, so I'll move on right now to my 4th best practice, which was publicly celebrating innovative thinkers. Through the course of this, one of the things that was really important to me was, not coming at this from a harsh oversight lens that was like highly legalistic or rule bound or putative. I wanted to celebrate people who were willing to take risks in this environment and to find people that were leaning in and trying to responsibly use AI tech in a bureaucratic environment. And so a lot of the way that we framed both our public hearings, but also our private roundtables, was around finding those kind of brilliant thinkers and celebrating them. Over the course of this work, we had one large public hearing. This was in about January of 2024, where we got together at that time 3 of the only kind of thought leaders in the legislative branch who were really focused on implementing AI. And we had them in and we said, what have you learned? How are you trying this out? What do other people need to pay attention to? So that was relatively successful. I think it, more than anything else, what it did was send the message to folks that we did not have the bandwidth to directly engage with, to say, Congress and this committee are focused on encouraging responsible AI use. So that was really the point of that hearing. And then we went on to, from that hearing, have a private roundtable where we took every member of our committee and we said, hey, look, we just heard from these experts on how cool it is that they're starting to play around with, AI innovations and projects. What are we doing in the House itself? And that's when we started getting really serious around having a member-led roundtable that would develop the guardrails for use of AI in the House itself. And so, the timing was really important there. The hearing itself having a positive tone, and then the members seeing that and wanting to build from there and understanding a little bit of the complexity here and saying, hey, we can do this and it's okay for us to lean in. So kind of like that pacing and that positive optimism towards, walking into this together, I think really helped get our members into the headspace where they needed to be to have that private roundtable. And in the roundtable, all of the kind of documents to hold that roundtable are already in the library for Bússola Tech online. And so those are already kind of available to everybody. But coming out of that roundtable, and this was just like a 2-hour open discussion around a whole host of issues at the member level and with experts and House officials. Coming out of that, we, immediately hit the ground running and turned that discussion into the guardrails that we wound up using from then until the point several months later where we had an official House IT policy. So it really helped us kind of like bridge this gap while the cement was still wet in between, how we were going to approach really using this in house and having a hardly coded firm IT policy that our IT shop could support. And so that work happened kind of over the summer and fall of 24. I'm going to turn to my fifth best practice right now, which is kind of where we're at right now within the House as an institution, which is moving from discrete pilots to enterprise solutions. So a lot of this work is like, okay, we've laid the foundation, we have a policy in place, we have members excited about this, we have staff that are learning how to use these tools, we've got a couple of pilots or projects that are working. So what we're focused on now is like, how do we evaluate successful pilots, right? Like, what are the KPIs for that? What makes for success in a pilot that is going to trigger that pilot to become something we're applying or growing to the enterprise-wide level? And how do we transition the funding for, a small pilot into, the routine kind of IT budget that we work under, which is oftentimes set several years in advance. And so how do we kind of like bridge that gap between having a good idea, funding it at a small scale, and then growing it into something that is supported by an operations and maintenance budget and likely supported by like different kind of technical support staff that we have. And we're also, thinking carefully around cost savings, like how do we view an emerging technology that quite frankly is like very expensive as, holistically in a way that can help us by, enabling us to retire legacy tech or recode legacy tech quicker than we otherwise would have. How are we starting to like track cost savings from getting rid of old tech and leaning into this new tech? And how do we think about offsetting that? In a cloud model where we're paying for data egress and data ingress and, and data usage generally, as opposed to just this like buy once and you own the software model. And so, I think a lot of our learning right now is looking at that end-to-end acquisition pipeline and trying to be really smart about building these pathways so that we can do this quicker and better. So that, in a nutshell, is really like how we brought AI tools into the House in an implementable way.
Thank you. So I have a couple of follow-up questions for you, Jessica. So now that AI is probably the fastest emerging technology that mankind has seen so far, and every day is a new day, do you think these kind of guardrails, this kind of oversight plans, this kind of checks and balances kind of gets outdated pretty soon? So do you think that in your experience over the last couple of years that you and the whole world is trying to catch up in a sense with the advancement of technology, the rapid pace of innovation, and the risks coming in thereby?
Absolutely. The work that we did 2 years ago in IT life cycles is ancient, and we knew that that was going to happen. As we said about issuing our policy, we committed to updating it yearly, not bi-yearly. So as a normal modus operandus for House IT policies, we review them every 2 years, which is once for Congress. With AI, it was moving so quickly, we agreed to update it once per year. Immediately after it was issued, we started asking for feedback on it, right? And so that gave us kind of a little window. We issued in about September 23. September 24 was when we issued it. So for those next couple of months, the remainder of that year, we actually went out and we said, okay, hey, everybody who consulted with us on this original plan, give us some feedback. You've seen this evolve. What do you think of it now? How is it going? We reached out to a number of chiefs of staff and said, hey, are you using this? Let us know what you're thinking. Did we miss the mark? Did we hit the mark on the head? Are you feeling nervous? Are you feeling optimistic? Did we go too far? Not enough. And we got feedback from our friends in civil society. We did not stop at the boundaries of the institution because, we have kind of a commitment to make sure that we're serving the American people. We are the people's house. So we were asking also all of our civil society friends to give us feedback as well. So we've taken all of that feedback and, we roll it into the next iteration of policy, which, we're actively working on as we speak to make sure that we're evolving kind of real time. Is that, enough? I think we're going to have to remain flexible. And so number one, we need to remain flexible to the technology that's changing and a marketplace that's changing, and even like the cost of these goods and services kind of that are changing. And we need a policy that allows us to do that. And then we also need to keep the conversation open, quite frankly, when it comes to not resting on our laurels. And again, this is from a committee perspective, but when we look at the agencies that we have oversight responsibilities for, making sure that their executive management is really empowering all of their staff and their workforce to lean in and have a flow of information up. This isn't just always top down. We have to enable our staff to bring cool ideas, bring new ideas up, lean into new technologies, and help us compete.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. The answer is never whether it's good enough or not, sufficient enough or not, or restrictive enough or not. I think it's the key is to have an open mind and ready to be surprised with the kind of advancement of technology when we're talking about a machine having human-like intelligence sometime soon in future. But yes, so, and adapting to the challenge is what the key is in my mind.
Yeah, no, I agree. And as we all know, this is not going to stop, whether it's AI or another emerging technology like quantum or blockchain, right? Like blockchain in particular, crypto has been getting a ton of attention in the news here lately. But I think this model of agile oversight when it comes to technology implementation in parliaments is something that we can apply over and over again in terms of how we structured the oversight work. That's very different than the technical work, but just the oversight of the technology. I mean, I do think knowing that for agencies, knowing that a parliament is looking to use the technology in a responsible way and is expecting reasonable foundational guidelines up front worked really well for us.
Great. My next question is, what do you think is the biggest challenge in the parliamentary adoption context, which is security which is kind of paramount importance, because there is a lot of sensitive information going back and forth between members and others. Manpower in terms of training, bringing them up to speed, or on the
Yeah.
other side of the coin, flip side of the coin, is letting go of people because some of their busy work
Yeah.
has been taken over by AI. Third would be the ROI, the kind of huge investment, but both CapEx and OpEx investment that it would require, or a combination of all. What do you think is the biggest challenge?
I mean, it's easy to say a combination of all because then I don't have to prioritize them and guess which is most important. They really, they all surface in different ways, and you know, I often have more of a role in the change management and the kind of vision and goal setting of these than the actual technical implementation. And I see the, you know, the balance of these beautiful traditions that we have evolved in parliaments that are paper-based and historical and need to be cherished, and trying to figure out what the essence is that we need to keep, and and what we can reimagine in a digital landscape. Like having that discussion with people who disagree with you and figuring out if there's a path forward, and if so, how, and where we can find kind of common ground to build a new system. I think is kind of the fun challenge of this all. But I say that not diminishing any of the other aspects that you mentioned.
Okay, cool. So the last question would be, what yours or the House of Representatives priorities for, say, medium term, say the next 5 years or so? Where are you going in terms of your focus areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we're looking right now at like value proposition, I guess I could say, in terms of looking at solutions that really make sense to the end user, which for us is very overworked, staff who need to synthesize a ton of information in almost no time at all, and need, reliable or reasonably reliable generative responses. So we're looking enterprise-wide, and we're trying to figure out how we can move the needle in a way that's kind of the most bang for the buck, given the challenges that we're facing. For us, it always comes back to oversight. We're using these tools not just to lean into the tools, but to perform our constitutional duties in terms of robust oversight. And so anything that we can do to help our people and synthesize towards that end, we're looking at. So yeah, I would say it really is just looking at which of our bigger projects are working well, and how do we move the enterprise forward holistically.
Can you give a couple of examples if you can share? Or if you don't have any on top of your mind, that's okay. But anything, for example, analyzing the legal references for new laws to come out, or a wonderful search engine which does this and that, or a voice operated command to do this, something like that. So
yeah, I'll say one. So we just approved this one tool where our communications staff are frequently trying to summarize documents, basically policy memos or floor speeches for social media communications purposes. And we just approved an enterprise-wide tool that's available to every single house staffer that we have, to enable basically server-side RAG processing of documents that they've uploaded in order to synthesize and help them easily generate either talking points or other communication deliverables. So it's all based on public information that's already been shared, but we have an enterprise-wide tool that's allowing them to do that. So that's a really good example where we piloted, we got some feedback from communications folks, it was successful, and we've now gone through all the like cyber reviews of this tool and deployed it to everybody in our environment. So communications is a really big one. We're definitely looking at some of our what more we can do when it comes to legislative drafting and natural language processing in order to compare different bill drafts, which is something that we already can do. But we're looking at ways that we might be able to do that better. We're looking at ways that we can generate summary language of bills using AI technology. And we're looking at ways that we can kind of enhance some of the search capabilities of our already published legislation.
Thank you. That's all from my side. Thank you for the wonderful session, explaining the initiatives that the House of Representatives has been taking for the last couple of years. Thank you so much for your time.